Hi, everyone. So I want to start by saying thank you all for coming. And I want to give us all a round of applause for MRTA, Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, passing on March 31st. A huge shout out to local groups Rock Normal, led by Mary, and Hemp Lab, led by Zach. They've done so much work with educating the community, mobilizing people into action, and finally ensuring that the marijuana prohibition came to an end. And when this happened, a lot of groups were kept in mind, especially Black and brown communities who have been historically harmed by marijuana prohibition. So today they're going to spend some time talking about what it means to have marijuana legal in New York, with this legislation being one of the most progressive forms of legalization in the whole country. We're going to have time for questions and answers. So thank you all for being here. Marijuana is legal. You can smoke. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Stanley. So as Stanley said, my name is Mary Kruger. I am, take the mask down. Zach and I are both fully vaccinated, so we can be maskless next to each other. I am the founder and executive director of Rock Normal, the Rochester chapter of the National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws. We have been around for 3 years now. The MRTA has been a bill that's been introduced 8 years. This is the 8th year that it was introduced, and so a bill a long time in the making. Zach and I are going to talk more about. So, Zach?
Yeah, I'm Zach. I am the founder and executive director of New York Hemp Lab, as well as the founder of Flower City Collective. Mary and I are encyclopedias when it comes to the law, and we really want to create this platform again and again. This is the first of many to come, because we find this is the best way for folks to get information and also create community. So at any point, if you got any questions, raise a hand, ask questions. We also have another a text or a digital way of submitting questions, but yeah, we're really trying to create this for y'all, and we're going to review some higher level stuff of like what cannabis legalization means for consumers, or people who carry cannabis, etc., and then maybe a little brief overview of what the opportunities are from a business perspective. But really, the point is to create this space again and again. We really invite y'all's questions, and yeah, this is anywhere you can smoke cigarettes, you can smoke cannabis. That's a big thing. So this is cannabis-friendly gathering, and yeah, we just really appreciate y'all coming out. Thank God the sun's coming out for a moment, and yeah, we'll go forward from there.
Yeah, and like Zach said, we're going to hold questions until the end, so we will have a chance.
I didn't say that. I said...
well, you can raise your hand, but it'll be up until the end when we're done talking.
Mary's the boss, that's right.
So you can, either wait till the end to ask your questions, or you can send them in. So you can go to rocknormal.org, and we have a button right on our homepage that you can send in questions that we'll be reviewing live and answering them at the end of what Zach and I have to talk about. You can also send a text message if you don't want to waste your data. So you can text 22333. You can send it, if you send Rock Normal 348, that'll opt you in to be able to send questions to us. So it's Rock Normal 348, and it's 22333. So we'll say that again at the end if you think of your questions, want to text them to yourself and then text them to us because you forgot that. So lots of ways to get us your questions. Yes, with that, want to just jump in? Start talking about it?
Yeah, let's start talking about it. So, cannabis legalization. Obviously, a lot has happened. You've heard the hurrah, but really understanding where we're coming from is important to understand how we want to move forward. And again, creating community in this space again and again is going to have so much more impact this beyond just consumption, and will lead to what transformation looks like, the implementation of social justice and the use of cannabis funds. That's kind of like where we're going. So, if we look at the brief history, New York State has been the arrest capital in the world for marijuana-related offenses, specifically impacting Black people and communities of color across the board. And when we look at Rochester itself and Monroe County, we have nothing to smile about.
Yeah, so I did a report a few years ago with Rock Normal and the Start Smart Coalition, which is a group of organizations and individuals across New York State that have been fighting for this bill, which is centered in justice, equity, and reinvestment. And in that brief, we found that Black folks in the city of Rochester were 10 times more likely than their white counterparts to be arrested for low-level marijuana possession. So, Rochester is no different than New York City and then all of the other bigger cities that we hear about. And so that's why it's so important when we legalize that we are, like Zach said, looking at the history of what marijuana prohibition has done to communities and really taking responsibility for how it's broken communities down and seeing how we can use marijuana legalization as a way to build communities back up.
And so one thing to be aware of is, marijuana has been decriminalized since 1970, but since then, over 800,000 New Yorkers have been arrested and put into the system. And again, the ripples it has for families, for communities in general, is just so substantial. So even under what we call decriminalization, there was so many folks who've been incarcerated. In 2019, there was an expansion on decriminalization, which some folks celebrated, and us, we, of course, anything is better than nothing, but we continue to shake our heads and demand more. You want to talk about the introduction of MRTA?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, the MRTA, the bill that we got passed, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, it's not a new bill. This is the 8th year that it was introduced in the Senate and the Assembly. And we've had the same sponsors on the bill all 8 years. So Senator Liz Krueger from a district in Manhattan and Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes, who represents a district in Buffalo. Without their commitment to this bill and to marijuana justice with marijuana legalization, we wouldn't see the progressive historic legislation that we got passed. So having incredible sponsors on this bill and then a coalition of individuals and organizations around the state is really how we got here today.
Yeah, and also by luck, by the governor fucking up in such a short amount of time on so many fronts. Like literally, the only reason why we have this bill, which is, you would have asked folks 2 months ago if this was possible, and no one would have said yes, but we would all hope so. And what came through the pipeline is only because the governor couldn't flex and he doesn't have any more friends. So we got really lucky.
Yeah.
So it's also something to celebrate, like the synchronicity within all this and the opportunity, because now New York has literally passed the most progressive and honestly like foundational bill that one could imagine. And then as a community in Rochester, we are also faced with the opportunity of how to leverage that. So we have the best bill in the country. How can we make Rochester I don't know if it's the best community, but really take it from the ground and keep running with this to ensure that we can translate that into on the ground, relatable and impactful justice, reformation, and really growth for this community.
Yeah, definitely. And, to Zach's point about this being really the most progressive legislation that we've seen passed in the country, we'll talk more about the points that were included in it. But you look back to the first states that legalized, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, those states, to give you an idea, in their initial legislation didn't have any measures for expunging people's records who had previous charges for marijuana possession or anything. I mean, all of that was an afterthought. And so, to us, that was inexcusable. It was never going to be an afterthought. It was going to be what the bill was centered in. And so this bill is actually so progressive and just so historic that, it's what's being looked at for the federal model. So Senator Schumer has actually reached out to our coalition, and we're meeting with him next week to go over, what was wrong in the MRTA and what needs to be made better in the federal legislation that they're working on. So this is something that really is going to have an impact on not only how other states pass their legislation, but also how we do it at a federal level.
Yeah, that's right. And so those pillars that this bill is based upon is justice, equity, and reinvestment. And we're going to approach those, and then how that translates to us as consumers, folks who are interested in business, et cetera. It's like it goes all the way down to the bottom as to if anyone's carrying on them right now, what does that mean? So we're going to do some high-level reviews, but we're going to start with reinvestment. And reinvestment, one of the big things, and I'll let you take it from in a moment, Mary, but 40% of tax revenue within the MRTA is committed to community reinvestment, giving funds back to communities disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. And that is such a number that dwarfs anyone else in the country. And we're going to talk more about what that exactly means, but it's literally, it's so substantial. And so there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, to give an idea, I mean, there's no other state that has allocated any percentage of tax revenue to a community reinvestment grant fund. And it's something that, really we got the idea from advocates in Oakland, California, who they were able to pass legislation at the city level that says 25% of their tax revenue goes to a community reinvestment grant fund. And so what a community reinvestment grant fund is it's money that goes specifically to, grants that are available to communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. And that's defined in the bill of what that means. There was, at one point when, as Zach was saying, to have gotten 40% of tax revenue into the bill is just, it's unheard of. We were fighting for 50%, so to only have to bump down to 40% when the governor was trying to give us 0% is like, thank you, Governor Cuomo, for fucking up. Thank you, COVID, for happening, because none of this would have happened if this bill was passed last year or if it was passed earlier this year. And so, yeah, it's really, just to imagine what all of that extra tax revenue is going to do when it is not to the general fund, not for the governor to decide where it goes, but it's going to concentrated programs that are going to build these communities back up that we've broken down through marijuana prohibition. So it's for programs like workforce development, or it's if there's an organization in the community that's providing mutual aid, it's to support them, or it's to build a new playground if that's what a community feels like they need. And so it's going to be a real community input on where the grant money goes as well. So we'll have more information about that as it comes out.
Yeah, and I think we begin to then look at the justice aspect. And one of the biggest things is folks who have been previously charged with crimes that are now legal or only a violation will have their records automatically expunged. And I don't know about y'all, but like every one of my friends either got arrested or, literally got arrested, and how that impacts people downstream, for the rest of your life or the next decade, it's nuts. And so to begin looking at the opportunity for folks to kind of have a clean slate, it's a great step towards reform, incarceral reform, and in general. And it's a really tangible thing where it's like, no longer are folks criminalized, but they're also opportunity for reintroduction and access. How many people lost voting rights or access to governmental support? You name it. It's such a comprehensive strike against you once you do receive some kind of, whether it's a felony or a misdemeanor. It has a lot of impact. Yeah,
your access to gainful employment, your access to federal school loans to get a higher education. There's so many things that when I started doing this work, because I've never been arrested. I've consumed cannabis for 16 years and have never had an encounter with law enforcement. And a lot of it's because of the color of my skin. A lot of it's because I grew up in Irondequoit. And, that is kind of what started me in doing this work, is just recognizing all of that privilege that I hold as a white person who consumes a shit ton of cannabis and have never had any interaction with law enforcement, and knowing that my Black and brown counterparts in the city have had a lot of interaction with law enforcement solely because of cannabis, and then the ripple effects that has out into a community to, if you get arrested, and even if you don't get charged, but you got arrested and then were held for 24 to 48 hours, did you just lose your job? Did you have a kid that you needed to pick up from school that you weren't able to? And there's just so many ways that it ripples out into communities, which is why, it's just really incredible that we were able to get this bill passed where the state actually took responsibility for so much of that damage that they've done. And it's not a perfect bill. There's still some shitty things in it, and we'll get to that and try to fix them, but it's a really great starting point.
Yep. And the next bullet point we have, which some are already celebrating, again, anywhere that it's legal to smoke tobacco, you can smoke cannabis. except while driving. That's something that we all gotta remember. I don't know if you're a fan of the blunt cruise, just still be mindful. It's still considered inappropriate, but I think that's just a huge thing. And like anyone who's ever been to a place where you can consume cannabis freely, whether it's through legalization or, it just, the sigh of relief that, how many people in this community just felt for no longer being criminals, like literally just for doing something that a lot of people do and have been doing for a long time. So I think that's just something really to celebrate. You want to talk about the THC?
Yeah, so this is something that NORML is going to have to do a lot of work educating folks on over the next couple months. But as of when the bill was passed, it's illegal for employers to discriminate against you for a positive THC test. There's a handful of jobs. Yes, that is also historic in this legislation. No other state has. There may have been one other state that's included it, but a lot of the states in the beginning, it's something they have to try and get consumer rights for afterwards. Our sponsors were like, if we're going to make this legal, we can't continue to criminalize people for it. We have to take away all of the criminal aspects that we can around consumption. And so, I have never gone after a job that drug test because I'm like, I'm never going to pass it. So why am I going to take a test? I'm going to fail. And I think it's, it opens up a lot of gainful employment opportunities for folks that were currently closed off before. So, I know that there are still employers that are discriminating against folks. I've heard from a handful of people in the last week that are facing this. So if this is something that you, a friend or family member, is facing discrimination against for testing positive for THC, reach out to NORML. So rocknormal at rocknormal.org, or reach out to us on our social media channels. And we'll get you linked up with a lawyer that you can talk to free of charge that can give you some advice on what to do and next steps. So definitely working on that and education around it.
And then folks on probation and parole no longer face consequences for a positive THC test, which is just huge. What a cyclical thing of it's just crazy. It's just such a loop. So that's a big thing. But again, it's like how to hold those in power accountable, because we're going to see that being abused or neglected or avoided. So it's just, again, kind of part of the reason why we're creating this conversation is so there's more opportunity for holding those in charge accountable.
So to that same extent, they're still going to probably try to discriminate against folks that are on probation and parole. And so, like Zach said, we're getting this information out to the community so you can help folks if they are being discriminated against, point them to us at Rock NORML and we will help them.
Another exciting thing you want to talk about?
Yes. As of October 1st, if you are a medical marijuana patient in New York, you can grow up to 6 plants at home. So we fought really hard for home grow. They were trying not to give it to us. And 18 months after the first dispensary opens, they will have regulations for adult use home grow. So
get your medical card.
There's, it's going to be a while before we have adult use dispensaries in New York. It's probably a good 18 months out before the first dispensary opens, and that's at the very earliest. So our medical marijuana dispensaries are going to, they're going to have whole flower sometime soon, because they can have whole flower now. So before, a medical marijuana program had very limited selections. They had only ground flower. So
which was only recent because they couldn't have flour. So then they said, well, it's ground flour.
So we'll grind up the flour for you.
Because New York State's really anti-smoking. And so that we'll actually see that, we can talk more about it later, but it's they didn't want to promote smoking. So ground flour, its application is for vaping. And that's something just to kind of see how their mentality is.
Yeah. So if you are interested in home grow, definitely get your medical card. It is extremely easy to get your medical card in New York State. There is definitely a financial barrier to it, which we as NORML are working on trying to put together a program to help folks with that and prioritizing people who've been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. So trying to figure out funding for it, because it is $140 on average to go to the doctor appointment to get your recommendation, to get a referral for the program. To get into the program is free, but you're going to have to pay a doctor on average $140. So we can get more information about that to folks who are interested about the medical program.
And so, yeah, there's definitely a bunch of reductions with regards to penalties. With the governor's bill, there was this big thing, the CRTA versus the MRTA, and the Cannabis Regulation Taxation Act, which was the proposed governor's bill, actually increased the penalties for non-legal cannabis. It's almost like we recriminalize cannabis in some strange way. And one thing we can say is, and we're actually going to review what the new rules look like, but it's been a substantial reduction and really kind of freeing up what folks have access to without reprimand. One of the biggest things from a possession standpoint is it's legal to have up to 3 ounces at home or on your person immediately. So any New York citizen can have 3 ounces on them at any point in time. More than 3 ounces up to 16 ounces is a violation with a possible fine of $125 or up to $15 days in jail. So if there's definitely an opportunity there that can be, it's a good start, but it doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. So it's something to be mindful of. That being said, I think when we begin to look at what folks can have at their home, it's definitely a different story than that as well.
Yeah, so there's this period of time where, the bill was written in a way where some things take effect immediately, some things are going to take effect 18 months after the bill was passed, some things take effect 18 months after the first dispensary opens. There's a lot of different timelines that were written in this bill. So the possession has some different timelines too. So right now what Zach had just said was, more than 3 ounces up to 16 ounces is a violation. More than 16 ounces up to 5 pounds is a misdemeanor.
And this is, as we interpret it, it's in public, like it's not at your house.
No, this is, right now, this is in public or at your house. Yep. And anything over 5 pounds is a felony. But 18 months after legal sales start, or for medical patients, 6 months after the bill was passed, so October 1st, you can have up to 5 pounds at your home. So they did that because the way and that was not something we've been advocating for. That was a surprise to us as well, 5 pounds. But the reason they did that was because, really our sponsors wanted to take every tool that they could away from law enforcement to continue to criminalize folks for cannabis. And so there's been cases in the past where they weigh the entire plant that folks are growing. So they'll weigh like the roots and all of it. And so it's to account for that as well, and to really not let that be something.
Yeah, and if you think about if everyone can grow 6 plants, 3 in flower, 3 in veg at any point in time, 5 pounds makes sense. Each plant you cultivate is, moving anywhere between a quarter. It depends on the size, but like you can easily see if someone grows 6 plants total in a year that they have 5 pounds total that they cultivated. So it's my friends who know how to grow big plants say that's a limitation, but for most of us, it's a pretty darn good thing.
And so there are some things in here that are different if folks are under 21 or under 18. So for folks under 21 to possess any amount, it's a civil infraction. So that is, that's great that we're not differing for youth and having the penalties increase as the amount increases, and that it's just a civil infraction.
It's actually just thinking about like how the medical card barrier, and even just like folks who can't pay it's a $50 fine, up to $50, and it's just thinking about the opportunity to be creative around using funds or generating a fund to help folks with paying this stuff to keep people like getting a penalty on top of a penalty for not being able to afford. Those are just things like we have to be thinking about, because that's another way that someone could get caught up.
Yeah, because let's be realistic. Just because this bill is the most progressive that's ever been passed, we're still going to see Black and brown people disproportionately affected by where the prohibition still exists. And so that is something that we have to be aware of, and we have to be thinking of how can we, like Zach said, create funds or, amendments or things in regulations that can help. And that's a perfect example of the Community Reinvestment Grant Fund, of money that could be used for that. You could have a community organization that what they do is they help youth pay fines for, Normal could do it. We could help youth pay fines that they can't afford related to marijuana possession, and then help folks not get entrapped in that system.
And one thing to note too, we said up to 5 pounds misdemeanor. Anything above 5 pounds is a felony, and so just might as well set that threshold so folks are aware. I got to put that out there. In public view and burning only if otherwise prohibited in locations. If you're smoking somewhere you're not supposed to, civil infraction, fine up to $25 or community service. Alternatively, on school grounds, any amount is a civil infraction and community service, etc. So it's just be mindful of where you're consuming, and that still has a play there.
And then so moving on to sales. So if the buyer's under 18, it is a misdemeanor and up to 1 year in jail, but there's a defense if the buyer is less than 3 years younger than the seller. So there's some language in there around that.
So basically, there's with whatever the age, if the person who made the sales within 3 years of that individual, then it's not the same, which is important to know. And then two is is it
under 21 first, and then 3 ounces for anything. So if the buyer is under 21, so between 18 and 21, it is again a misdemeanor. So it's the same for if they're under 18 or under 21.
And these would, anything with THC in it is going to be regulated as tobacco and alcohol at this point at 21. So that's the reference point.
Yeah. And then if any amount is sold unlawfully, it is a violation. Well, any amount up to 3 ounces. If it's sold unlawfully, it's a violation. Up to 15 days in jail and a fine of up to $250. So, obviously the jail time and the fines are not things that we wanted to see. And we weren't in the conversations behind closed doors that happened when the actual decisions were made on the bill. So I would imagine that these punishments came from really hard lobbying from law enforcement and the PTA. And I mean, it is shitty to see these things in here, but if you knew what the CRTA looked like and the things that we were up against and how much they were trying to just further criminalize cannabis in every way with legalization, this is work that we can handle. The CRTA was not work that we could handle. Yeah, so in the beginning of the year, when we were still negotiating with the governor, when he still had some say, the odor of marijuana was something that they were trying to really keep as, still being probable cause to search a vehicle. We were able to get with the MRTA that odor is no longer probable cause to search a vehicle, which is huge because we all know how much law enforcement uses that time and time again to mainly, again, against Black and brown people, to search vehicles and then to get folks into the criminal justice system. So that is a huge win. They can use the smell of burnt marijuana in court as like when if you go to court for a DWI charge or DUAI charge, they can use the burnt smell marijuana, but it's gonna be interesting to see how that plays out in court because I can't tell the difference between burnt marijuana and fresh marijuana depending, so it's interesting.
Mary's got terrible cotton mouth. I'm going to take over for a moment. All right, so driving while, so consumption open container in the car, it's expanded to include cannabis, so it's a traffic infraction. Driving while impaired by drugs, misdemeanor. So that's not too far off.
Same as it was.
Yeah, same as it was. Then why is license suspension?
Because that's with the driving.
Oh, that's, okay, great. Yeah, I think that's pretty standard. So then, the next step we want to talk about just some general licenses that we can expect, and we want to start with equity in licenses. So we know that licenses are just a small part of equity, but a bigger part includes like additional funding for business support services and incubators, and specifically targeting and supporting minority groups, and that's the goal. It's called a preferred applicant, and they're trying to get 50% of licensees to go to folks who meet the following criteria. So first, They're a member of a community disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition. They have an income lower of 80% of the median income in the county of residence. They've been convicted of a cannabis-related offense or have had a family member, parent, guardian, spouse, or was a dependent of an individual who was convicted of a cannabis-related offense. There's also, women-owned business, minority business, and also veteran. There's a third section for the veteran community as well that is just, so there is this kind of comprehensive opportunity for folks to be prioritized who aren't just, who've come from a variety of different backgrounds. And I think that's really exciting to look at, because when we begin to see how many different business licenses there are, and with the intent to have a goal of 50% of license going to minority groups is pretty substantial.
Yeah,
it's huge.
And, the piece about having preferred applicants be folks that have been convicted of a cannabis-related offense is like, you look at Colorado and people who had been convicted were excluded from the industry. It had it in the law that they couldn't get a license. And so for it to be something in our legislation that makes those folks preferred applicants, again, is just setting the standard and the bar much higher than what's been done before us.
So should we look at licenses? There's a variety of licenses. It's like there's so many. The devil's in the details, and there's a ton of information. But we'll at least just provide an overview. We can answer more questions about that later. But first and foremost, RO is a term we should be familiar with. It stands for a registered organization. That's what all the medical cultivators, processor, it's a term for anyone operating in the medical community, a registered organization. There's only 10 licenses given out for the past handful of years. You had to have a lot of money to qualify to even be considered. So a lot of that's probably going to stay the same. And to some detriment, they're allowing for the medical companies to be vertically integrated. That means that a company they own the means of operation, production, and distribution through the entirety of the process. So from planting the seed all the way to the sale. And that's something that we don't really see for the adult use for everyone else. So it's kind of they're grandfathered in to have access to. And on a level, I can understand, because they have the infrastructure. If that is allowed, then they will be able to start selling cannabis sooner, which means more home growth sooner. If it wasn't without that, we may not see any adult use recreational cannabis being sold for 2 years. So it is kind of part of the justification that if this existing infrastructure can make the sales, then it allows for taxes to start, the industry to start, So I can understand where they're coming from, but most of us in the industry weren't too stoked about that.
And just to expand on that, because when I first started learning about vertical integration and why that mattered when we're then talking about smaller businesses coming into it. So, the vertically integrated businesses, like Zach said, they hold all of the licenses from seed to sale. So there's a lot lower costs when it comes to them just doing business, and they can save a lot along the way. They have more money to be able to adjust their prices and not have it impact them as much as a small business. And so the fear is that having big companies like that in the same space as smaller companies, that the smaller companies are just trying to get started while the big companies are already established, that there's going to be kind of this oligopoly that could be created with the big companies that are already established. So it's something that, we're keeping an eye on and seeing what we can do in regulations on, but it is the way the bill was written that the big companies get to play, and we always knew they were going to, but it's a problem to figure out. But there's a lot of licenses. I think that's what I get really excited about, is people are so focused on the cultivation license or the dispensary license, and we have so many licenses available.
Yeah, a lot of licenses to fill up. So first and foremost is marijuana production license that allows for the cultivation of marijuana that's indoor, outdoor, or mixed. There's a limit to how many locations. Basically, all of the licenses come with some kind of limits. We can talk more about that later, but just as a start. That might be your small craft. It might be a small cultivator. It might be a large-scale production. But those are folks looking for that license. Next would be marijuana processor license. That's folks who are purchasing, processing, and packaging marijuana into various marijuana products. And if I'm not mistaken, it also will include extraction, and that's something that we'll see, and that's a limit to, I think, 3 locations. Next would be the marijuana delivery license. Allows for individuals and businesses to obtain license authorizing activity related to the transport of marijuana from a retail store directly to a consumer. Retail store may be an online store, maybe literally brick and mortar. And I think there's some regulations around the size. If I'm not mistaken, the way that the delivery license is orchestrated is for smaller businesses, like below 25 people. And I think that's something to review more, but definitely a lot of opportunity to get people products, especially, post-COVID era where we're familiar with the delivery. It's definitely something to be aware of. On-site consumption license allows license holders to sell marijuana and marijuana products directly to individuals on-site for on-site use. That's a huge thing. I mean, it's really creating the doorway for culture, for gatherings, for normalization. Just like you may go to a bar, having access to a place where you can consume in an environment that's supportive, rather than, it's pretty awesome thing.
Yeah, and to me, the exciting thing about that license is like, okay, so there's the bar possibility where you can go and you can buy the cannabis and consume it there. But then there's also the businesses that are a possibility of like, think of like painting with a twist, where people are bringing their own to consume and you're having more community events around it. I mean, for me, if there was a gym that I could consume there, I would be a member of that gym. There's so many cultural things that can be created around cannabis where you don't necessarily have to touch the plant and sell it, but just create the space for it. So Jason and I looked into it yesterday. We looked into it with our lawyer yesterday. Richard asked, how does it, with the cigarette laws, how does that play into it all? If you have the on-site consumption license, the cigarette laws, there's rules in there where like you have to tell people that there's going to be consumption and all of that. But I looked into it really closely because I was like, that's where I see a lot of really cool businesses being created.
Yeah, there is the question, well, you can't smoke cigarettes inside. And the folks who can allow for tobacco consumption are like grandfathered cigar shops. And I do think that what's proposed here in the intention, the access that license was developed for, is going to disrupt the status quo there. And it doesn't mean that we're going to be smoking cigarettes everywhere again, but like really allowing for the spaces where people can consume cannabis. I think that's huge.
Yeah, so like you could get an on-site consumption license.
That's right. How we doing?
And we could look at art and get high. It'd be great.
We actually didn't do a very good job saying thank you to you.
That was my segue into it.
Oh, that was it. They've been just such huge allies through and through. If anyone needs to use the bathroom, there are bathrooms inside. They're still pre-opening, so this is definitely a place to get familiar with as things kind of go back and as they start opening the doors again. But yeah, just so much love for all the friends who are working their asses off really hard this week to get the doors open so we could be having y'all out here. So just really big thanks to you.
Thank you.
All right. I want to cut that short. Marijuana micro business license. This allows for the smallest scale of activity. This is there's going to be a limit on canopy growth. I can't remember what the number. If they may have not established what the actual size for canopy growth is yet, but it allows for permit holders. This is the exception to the rule of vertical integration. It allows a small business to cultivate, distribute, and sell directly to customers. So I'll call it a micro vertical, which is a pretty fun thing. It allows for production, processing, sale at small levels. And it's your own. If you have that license, you can't have another license. There's definitely a lot of like, if you hold this license, you can't hold that license. Like if you hold a retail license, you cannot have an economic interest in any other license. And those are things that we're happy to expand on. Maybe not in this circle, but like we'll probably begin to put on events that are curating that so we can really see the details there. But the micro business license is exciting for small groups. Like I work on a small farm, and we wouldn't ever be able to afford or compete with large scale production. But if we can grow on a small scale and bring it to market, that's really, it creates a doorway for small based cultivators and businesses. We got retail license, allows licensees to sell marijuana products directly to individuals for those individuals to be able to consume. but they can't consume.
They can't consume.
No, they can't. Okay, yeah, and there's the retail license it prohibits them from selling alcohol. That's one of the biggest things. Like if you hold an alcohol like there could not be overlap between alcohol and cannabis.
Yeah, and I mean this is also something that's much different. I mean, I think from any other state. So I've been to a handful of other states that have legalized, and you go to the dispensary and you can never consume in the dispensary. You always have to take it and consume somewhere else. That's not how it's going to be here. They could also have, you can go to a dispensary and you can consume there. So
I'm learning things right now too, folks. Here we go. Next thing, distributor license, transportation between licensed entities. So that might just be farm to, manufacturer, processor, maybe, manufacturer all to the retailer, etc. Definitely going to be a big opportunity for that. Testing, just standard for laboratory testing. There's going to be a pretty big demand for and high turnover expectation for testing. If anyone has access to or experience in the hemp industry, we know that testing's been very limited and most people ship their tests out of state. But definitely high overhead to build a laboratory. Nursery license allow folks to store, sell, produce seeds, clones, etc. So if got the secret genetics out there and you want to share them with the world, there's an opportunity there. Then a cooperative license, which allows for farms to collaborate together and allows for the acquisition, possession, cultivation, processing, and distribution and sale of except to direct consumers. So it allows farms or cultivators to work together to bring product to a retailer without having to go through a distributor, and also allows them to operate under kind of a single entity, like a decentralized kind of business model, which is cool.
And yet something that isn't a license but is in the legislation is, if anyone's familiar with California and their caretaker model, where you can have an individual that is a registered caretaker for medical patients, and then that individual can grow up to 6 plants per person they're a caretaker for. And so there's definitely a business there to be made if, you charge folks for the plants care that you're doing for them, and then you give them their medicine. So there's a gray business to be created there, but there's a
great business to be created there. That's what I heard. We initially thought we were going to just be talking for 20 minutes and then opening questions, and so I do want to acknowledge we've kind of covered a lot of our high level stuff. We have some kind of updates and things to keep you up on, but do y'all have any questions? And if not, we can just put the microphones down, put some music on, and chill. But yeah, I think so. There's I have not seen that in the language, but I think there's still, this is the law, but the regulations are going to determine what we actually can do. And I think that's where, if that language is missing, we have opportunity to integrate that into the regs, and I think it's essential. That's a big question. I appreciate it.
Do you know about the micro business license? Did you have a delivery license as well?
So micro business, that's a great question. I actually don't know, but I do know you can have your own retail space. I imagine that would also include a delivery, but probably has some limitations. And that's a great question, and I think that's another one that the regs will also underline or strike out. So keep you updated there.
Is there any language in there for the waste process?
Yeah, so the question about waste, there's multiple fronts. There's the amount of waste that we see from packaging requirements. I think I heard something that the average gram of cannabis in legal states is accompanied by 30 grams of plastic, and that's some bullshit. And so looking at how to reduce waste, I think that'll be part of, there's going to need to be a lot of lobbying or grassroots initiative to push through the regs to reduce the amount of waste and the standards. It's if you can buy alcohol, which can kill you, or tobacco with a cellophane or a glass bottle, why does cannabis have to come in a safe? It doesn't make sense. And it's that's prohibitionist mindset. It's a lot of fear there, reefer madness. And then the byproducts we see, on the West Coast, like medical cannabis has to go to a medical grade landfill. It's like does spent biomass, like green material that's could biodegrade, it should not go anywhere besides back to the earth. And so I think, again, when we look at the regs, that's going to be something that not everyone's thinking about, but there's opportunity to again, if we have a really great bill that's like, I think environmental justice that's rooted in social justice is something to look at, how we're treating the plant, how we're treating the production process, and then the waste around it. It says a lot about how we actually are functioning.
Yeah, and I want to add in here, Zach and I are pretty experts, we're experts on a lot of this, but not all of this. And we have I've mentioned it a couple times, the Start Smart New York Coalition. There are folks in that coalition that are, just as much a part of this conversation as Zach and I are, that do represent more, the ecological side of it, and all of that. So
if there's questions we can't answer, like part of our desire is to bring the folks to the table who can. And again, this is the start where we hope it's not just Mary and us talking, but we got to do it. So we're starting here. So I think that's a great point there.
Yeah, and these questions are definitely informing, okay, what are the next events that we need to do? What are the information that we need to get out there? What are the comments that we need to bring back to the group that we work with and, keep working? There was a question that came in about, are we going to work on federal legislation next or federal legalization next? So Rock Normal is always supporting the work being done for federal legalization. We have a national Normal chapter that's based in DC that does all of the federal lobbying. So we go to DC once a year for the National Normal Conference, and we lobby once a year in person there. But as we have federal things that we're pushing, we'll put that out to everyone. We use a program called Action Alerts, and so we will write up emails that you can really easily just go onto our website and send to your representatives in support of whatever legislation we're trying to get through. So federal we work on, but there is a lot of work to be done in New York still, just because we legalized.
More specifically, there's so much work to be done in Rochester.
Yeah.
Mary and I were actually just talking, like, we've been so focused on statewide, we're trying to keep our community engaged and like educated. That's like, to take that energy and focus it on the city, like really we can do so much. And I think that's more exciting than federal. Like federal, for all the reasons to disrupt the prison pipeline, 100%. For businesses, I hear this often, that like if federal legalization happens immediately, like there is no small business in New York State specifically. So from a hometown spirit, like the opportunity for people to get on the ground and have an opportunity where like federal legalization will also come with trillions of dollars coming from like the big money. They say right now you could Google cannabis business sold or bought, and you'll see like in the past year like millions and millions of dollars being exchanged, and that's not even with like real money in the game. That's still with like massive banks not touching cannabis. And like when federal legalization happens, it's going to change who the players are and the amount of money that's directed into Marlboro's already in the game. Like there's big business is already like there's multi-billion-dollar cannabis businesses already operating, and that's in this world where federal banks aren't touching it. So when federal legalization happens, I mean it's going to be a game changer. And I would never shun liberation of the plant, but it's also like super important to know the value of like getting the community involved, like getting the feet on the ground, getting people focused, and imagining how cannabis looks like in the city, because that's where the greatest impact is going to happen.
I'm wondering, like, what counts as an open container? Like, if you go to a dispensary, say in Massachusetts, and then you bring some back, but like you open the container and you smoke some, but not in the car. Like,
It's not specified in the bill. It's going to be in regulations. Yeah.
But again, it's like every single point we've talked about, there's those questions to ask about it that is going to determine the regs. And that's probably why it could take 12 months before we see any regulations, and then the debate that's going to happen over those is going to be substantial. So yeah, it's a lot. I love that question, and we got to keep asking those questions because you could easily see how things can just slip through as well if that's not defined, that it can be abused. So,
and you can also easily see how this program could go to shit if we have shitty regulators in place. So that is what we're focusing on right now as normal, is getting good regulators in place and making sure that we have representation for consumers and advocates, and not just folks that have been involved in policy and that are actual prohibitionists, which is, some of the folks that are working for the governor right now in the marijuana program are just prohibitionists.
Like literally the person who is in charge of cannabis regulation or was appointed to is anti-cannabis.
Yeah.
I was like, how the hell are you going to change things when someone doesn't care about the communities who've been hurt by the war on drugs, doesn't care, thinks, it's still the devil's drug, and it's like that's not sensible. So it's still a strong opportunity to voice, get involved, and advocate, and find out who do we have to advocate on a local level, and how does that go back to Albany to make sure that our community is represented and also getting what we want, and creating strong community voice so we can make demands, whether that is on our local government, how funds are going to be used to changes we want to see, and that's just part of the conversation we're hoping to create here.
Any other questions? Move on to just upcoming events, and then
then just hang out.
Cool. So lost my spot here.
Well, Mary's Looking Hemp Lab, which is the organization I started, we're doing a very thorough breakdown of all of the laws. It's a cannabis legalization workshop. We're going to do it every Tuesday for 1 hour from noon to 1 p.m. Until we're done. And it's probably going to take 6 to 8 workshops to do that. You can go to nyhemplab.org and should be the reference point there to sign up. Also awesome way to stay involved is to follow our organizations on social media. That's where most of the work has been shared, and there's always things popping up that we may not be part of but we want to share. Always a great way. I imagine you're here, you followed somebody on social media, probably Stanley, because they're the most popular person in the crowd.
So to that, if you go to rocknormal.org, and just under the button where you could submit your questions, there's a button that it has an event handout with all of the organizers' social media handles on it, and then links to register for the event that Zach just mentioned, and then links to some of the events I'm going to talk about, as well as kind of a summary, a table of those, I'm trying to blank on all of the possession and sale charges that still exist. So in that sheet, you'll find a link to earlier this month, Senator Cooney held a marijuana legalization jobs and justice webinar that I was a panel on, as well as Melissa Moore from the Drug Policy Alliance and Tanya Osborne from Women Grow. And so it's about an hour long and is just a more detailed conversation around what's included in the bill. So you can watch a recording of that. Senator Cooney, along with Volunteer Legal Services Project, will be hosting an expungement clinic on May 4th from 6 to 7 p.m. The location still is to be determined, so we'll share that information once we have it.
And just for expungement clinic, do you qualify? What do you do next? Those are the things, just because you're expunged doesn't mean your world changes to your knowing. So I think it's, even if you're not being expunged, just to learn how to inform your community is essential. And again, why you're all here, how hopefully this information disseminates. The same thing with the expungement workshop.
Yeah, and like I said, in the coalition that we're a part of, there's folks that specialize in different areas. So there was something that we got into the bill around expungement that deals specifically with folks who have an immigrant status, because there's something that complicates things where if you expunge someone's record, that it could do something. So there's a special process that folks have to go through to get their records cleared if they have immigrant status. So that will be talked about more in the expungement clinic as well. And then Rock Normal is going to be announcing events over the next few months. We're going to be doing more of these in-person gatherings and just continuing this conversation.
And, there's, 30, 40 people here. We need to talk to 1,000 people by the end of the year, and it can't be the same people. And that's the only way that there's going to be real opportunity. And that's that means that may be the opportunity not to be like fucked over because you have possession. Maybe opportunity because you're interested in business, but like it's this, we want to do this in a way that is as accessible as possible. So if y'all have any ideas, places that would host us, like the intention is not just to be in this awesome parking lot, but to find ourselves in corners of the city that may be overlooked or may not have access to this information. And as myself, it's not my circle. I've been speaking to the same people a lot, and I'd love to talk to more people than who I have. So please, give us any perspective you have.
Yeah, and while we're definitely working on making, materials that we'll share out virtually, we really want to make the most out of this nice weather over the next few months and getting people in outside spaces together in a safe way that's distanced. And it's been a tough year not being able to get together. This is the first event that we've had in over a year, and that was going from Rock Normal doing at least 2 or 3 events every month for the last 3 years to then all of a sudden having nothing in person. So I'm really excited that we can have some fun events over the summer and we can consume at them legally and continue to get this information out there. And really the intent of the events that Rock Normal is going to be doing over the next few months is to get folks who want to be more involved in the chapter. We're looking for volunteers and folks who want to take leadership roles in planning out our events and getting education out there to the community. So definitely stay in touch. We want to have more folks helping us.
Yep. Yeah, so we're gonna hang out for a bit. Feel free to stay, feel free to go, but no, you got a place here at this table, and we're gonna keep setting it as long as we can. And we really appreciate y'all taking the time on this Sunday. Really appreciate Free the People of Rochester for just being supportive and seeing the vision and being collaborators. And we really, we're just super grateful for the UU Art Collective again. Just literally can't tell you how much happened in the past week to allow these speakers to be here in that space to be tidy for us. And it means so much. Again, thank you all for being here. And there's some great coffee inside if y'all haven't already tried it. So go check it out. And feel free to mix and mingle in a safe and smart way that you feel comfortable.